Everybody, and welcome to our little webinar here with Peter. My name is Erin Andrews. I'm the Climate Director here at Carbonhound, and we're really excited today to have Peter with us. Unwrapit has been, a partner of mine personally, I think, for a little while, and so we're excited to get into the conversation today about using sustainability to unlock some business value. But before we get into that, let's start with an intro from Peter. Peter, welcome. You want to start off by just letting us know a little bit about yourself and Unwrapit?
Yeah, happily. Thanks so much for having me. Hi, Erin. So I'm a social purpose entrepreneur. I'm the co-founder of Unwrapit, which we'll hear lots about. Prior to Unwrapit, I co-founded another B Corp called Grant Book. And prior to Grant Book, I started two other initiatives that married technology with a desire to do good. This is just sort of what I've been up to for my, entire working career. And I'm really proud that I've just let my path unfold like this. I feel like I have an earnestness that I might have lost had I tried to prove myself first in a big company.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we both share kind of a little bit of a startup path too, which is quite fun. So to both be working in sustainability, I think it's a natural conversation for the both of us to have. So maybe we can get started a little bit with like what motivated you to start Unwrapit? What does the company do? Kind of walk us through that process just so we know where you're coming from.
Sure. So Unwrapit is on a mission to make corporate and event gifting more sustainable. We work in an industry that produces vast amounts of landfill and untold emissions, all in the name of strengthening relationships. And we really believe there's another path, another way to do that also accounts for the limits that Earth has placed on us. So our approach is to curate gift options that, for the most part, are not physical and therefore can't end up in landfill. You can think of experiences, digital subscriptions, downloads, charitable donations, trees planted, and then just like very practical, consumable gift cards. Not the gift cards themselves, but what you could redeem with them. And this is what people want, actually. So there's some recent statistics I came across that 4 out of 5 corporate gifts or promotional products are discarded. That's 80%. 90% of recipients of corporate gifts say they don't want swag. And 56 of people in general prefer to give and receive experiences. So we're kind of tapped into something innate in kind of human preference. We're not trying to change sort of the psyche of those on the receiving end of these gifts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I mean, having my background be in circular economy obviously is how we kind of have known each other for a little while, and this is super related to reducing waste and being more mindful about consumption generally. So I'm quite excited to have you guys on this specifically because I know you've built your entire business with these values, and so just being transparent and upfront with folks who are watching that we work together, right? You're a customer of Carbonhound. We're helping you guys prove that value a little bit, right, through the data and through the numbers. So we'll get into that for sure. And so knowing that you started the business with this like sustainability mindset first, I'd love to know kind of what the most challenging part has been of that. I mean, there are probably many, but if there are one or two that really stand out as being the biggest challenges for businesses like yours, try to break into the space and get people on board with what you're doing.
I could think of so many challenges, but I'll highlight at least one or two. One challenge is just very practical in nature. If you are a company or an event and you want to give something that isn't physical as a gift, you don't have a lot of options. There isn't a sort of a proven way to do that. And typically it lacks ceremony when you sort of say, we've made a donation, or here's a link to download something that we want to offer as a gift in lieu of something physical. So our principal challenge, our first challenge, was building a platform that could create ceremony, that could create an experience that was memorable, that was on brand for the gift-giving company or event. And that's new. So even if the gifts resonate as what people want to be receiving instead of certain promotional products or other kinds of corporate gifts, we still had to create an experience around it that's equivalent to like the unboxing or the sort of surprise and delight you get simply by opening something. And then another challenge is then convincing folks that this is the right way to do it. So 90% of people say they don't want, a swag as a corporate gift. That doesn't mean 90% of the companies that give out swag or promotional products are in sync. So there's just like a strong belief or a custom around physical corporate gifting. The history of Unwrapit, prior to us being B2B, we were B2C, and the challenges I've described there were even more insurmountable, because Unwrapit was competing against like a Christmas tree with hundreds of years of tradition behind it. And so we feel like despite there being challenges in the corporate field, we are tackling something that's surmountable.
Yeah, especially when you think about the purpose of gifting, right? Like people want it to be a bit of an event, right? They want to have that experience. So it's quite interesting. I mean, I've gone through the flow that you guys have of receiving a gift, right? And it is very special. The way that you kind of walk people through and you're telling the story and making it more significant than like, oh, here's an e-card, with a code that you might want to redeem. And it's a bit like fun because you can choose what it is, and there's so much around that. I think it's just really interesting that yes, sustainability has been part of it, but it sounds like based on what you're saying, you also need to find that business need and like what's not being served right now and still fill that gap, right? But sustainability is a way that you serve it, if that's right.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So I know the work that we've done together specifically is really in hopes of kind of like getting that data together to tell the story and have sustainability be part of that flow that people go through as well, and have the data to back it up in the comparison. So I'd love to kind of go back a couple months ago before we actually started doing the work and just understand what triggered that, and like what need were you seeing wasn't being filled that you thought data could fill the gap? Just like walk me through the thought process of deciding to even start this work in the first place when it comes to like literally investing money in getting this work done, right? A lot of people want to, not a lot of people do it. So I'm curious from your specific situation, like how did you kind of go through that thought process of taking the leap and actually getting the data together and going through that work?
On the one hand, you made it very easy. The price point of working with you and the kind of value and the detail we could get was it just made it an easy and obvious choice. But the actual like kind of events that led to us saying that we wanted to sort of measure our carbon footprint, specifically the emissions associated with these non-physical gifts that people are able to claim through Unwrapit, was more serendipitous. I have attended the 2023 Circular Economy Summit, met someone there who runs Tempo Flexible Packaging, a leader in circular economy plastic packaging. He heard about Unwrapit and was like, to really sell this, you need a life cycle analysis done. I can connect you to experts and people on our team who do that. And it was a fairly daunting proposition for a company without a lot of means, like ourselves. A few weeks after that, I was having lunch with Moaz Bawani of AMLB, a customer of Unwrapit. And he said, Peter, like, are these gifts really more sustainable? Like Uber Eats, DoorDash, Starbucks, like, how do you know they're more sustainable? So it was like those two conversations back to back made me realize that everything we've been saying about how Unwrapit's more sustainable is sort of based on intuition. It's intuitive that an ebook or an audiobook has a lower footprint than a water bottle or a t-shirt. But we didn't actually have the data. So I was sort of very ready to embark on a process that could help us quantify the extent to which Unwrapit is lower emissions than traditional gifting. But what prepared me for that was these two chance conversations, and then your email.
Yeah. And then I just swoop in and like, hey, let's
Yeah,
talk.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah,
No, but I
the
think,
tooth fairy of emissions.
yeah. But the thing is, I think like having my background in circular economy as well, it made that conversation quite easy because it's like, you need something that's um, good enough to be credible, right? To share with those people that are asking those questions. But I think it's quite interesting that you actually did go down that thought process of what a life cycle assessment fully would look like. And I think it is important to distinguish the difference between those two things, right? Like there's a product carbon footprint that is based on research that has been done in the specific field and the specific products that you're offering. And some people, if they're in your shoes trying to say, okay, what am I communicating to customers? I think it's quite interesting that LCAs did come up because they're a much more robust, frankly, scientific study, like a very kind of, in some cases, in this case specifically, like an over-engineered almost study for what the needs are. So I guess balancing like the business need and the credibility along with the marketing story, because people I think are quite afraid of greenwashing as well too, right? So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, just coming from this being an integrity first business. How did you go through that exploratory phase to know what was good enough, but also not too much, and balancing that? Did you have any more to say on that process as you're evaluating your options?
Um, to be fully transparent, which is something I am, we knew and trusted you, right? Like, so I had an existing relationship with you through your work with Impact Zero Foundation, as a host of Impact Zero podcast. I knew that you wouldn't be working for a company that was fudging it or, putting together a story for us to tell that wasn't backed by scientific research data methodologies. So I really did lean on that relationship in making the decision. Lindsay and I both did, my co-founder Lindsay and I. So yeah, and we didn't, in that sense, compare our different options. What we had done previously is just think about the shipping emissions associated with packaging and parcel delivery. The idea of measuring what the carbon scope 3 emissions on the actual use or redemption of a gift seemed out of reach. Like, how could we possibly measure or know that impact without an expensive study carried out specific to us? But there was readily available data on like how much does the average parcel delivered by Canada Post or US Postal Service produce in terms of emissions by weight. So we had previously like contemplated a story that we could tell simply by the fact that our gifts didn't require shipping, or the majority of them didn't. But that was inadequate or an incomplete story, so we didn't really tell it.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good example though, right? Because you're exploring the options that are available. And I think there are actually a lot of people that are in your shoes where they're trying to understand, like, because when I'm talking to people, at least, it's like, okay, what are my avoided emissions? Like, what are we comparing against? And trying to navigate that whole process is so confusing, especially if you're not super familiar with all the international standards and what's good enough, right? And I think we did have a good number of conversations about it because I know that, you wanted to understand what you were doing and making sure that we were, what is the process? Is this good enough? Is a question that always comes up. And I think especially in our conversations it did as well, because, you're giving this data to your customers, right? So I think you're just such a good example of someone that wants to do something with integrity and you don't want to greenwash, right? And you are being really thoughtful about this. And I know ultimately our conversations and we have a relationship that makes it easier for sure, but I don't want to erase all the thought process that you definitely did do. And like, I know that you guys did that. And it's hard to kind of figure out what's important and what's real and what's not. So yeah, I think that process is really good to talk about for sure. So
Yeah.
thanks for that. Yeah. So, okay. So moving on to kind of more of the impacts of all this work. So, we worked together to do your product specific emissions, right? Understanding all of the different gifts that Unwrapit has, what are the emissions of that, and then we chose, I think, a couple of baseline products. I think there were 5 or 6 comparisons that we did. So you want to walk folks through kind of what that process looked like for us, and I'd be really interested to know from your perspective how that process felt. If it was easy, overwhelming. I mean, lots of emotions can come up, but I'm just curious if you can kind of walk us through the actual data and the work required, because it is easy, but it's not nothing, right?
Yeah, it's interesting as well, because we were undertaking this work in that height of our year-end like holiday gifting efforts. So yeah, the Vanessa on your team and others who contributed really did make it easy for us. In our case, we had essentially a record of every gift claimed to date through Unwrapit, what kind of gift it was, and the value of it, like the cost, monetary value, and the category. So what we were able to do is essentially export that information, share it with your team. Carbonhound then categorized all the different kinds of gifts into 10 or so categories, I think. Digital gifts, consumable, charitable donation, gift card for something consumable, and physical gift, because we do have those in the system, and associate an emissions level on a per US dollar equivalent. I thought this, by the way, also promoted a high degree of trust in your work and your methodology, because it's obvious after it was explained to us that a $25 Starbucks gift card is going to be more emissions than a $5 Starbucks gift card, because you could produce, and consume more coffee with that. But in both cases, it's less than getting a T-shirt mailed to you that you don't need or want. So we shared all that information. You helped us categorize and tag every gift. And then behind the scenes, you were also converting like Canadian dollars to USD equivalent, and GBP to USD equivalent, and Australian dollar to USD equivalent, to be able to provide a really comprehensive assessment on what the estimated emissions were associated with each type of gift claimed since we started tracking it in March 2021. And from there, like, your platform did the rest of the work in terms of benchmarking against these other scenarios where everyone received a T-shirt or a swag box. It was drop shipped or bulk mailed to one address. And we just kind of like could sit back and see what the data was telling us in terms of our overall emissions, as well as the company, or rather customer and campaign specific emissions.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm curious, so having that work is done, right? Now you have that information, those insights. I'm curious what conversations that sparked internally. I'm sure it's quite exciting whenever you get more data or insights like that as a business owner, because it means that, strategic opportunities. But what were you and Lindsay and the rest of the team talking about when you got that? I'm curious to kind of be like a fly on the wall in those conversations, if you can walk me through it.
Yeah, I think, for our whole history up until we received the report back from your team, we always thought we were avoiding and reducing emissions, right? Because there are emissions associated with the kinds of gifts that we offer through the platform. In the case of like trees planted as a gift, those trees have a negative emissions profile. So the big surprise for us, like when we were, when the data was revealed to us and shown to us, and we were able to access it through the platform, is that overall, since the beginning of Unwrapit's corporate gifting journey, we have achieved negative emissions as a result of a good number of recipients consistently choosing to plant trees as their preferred gift option. So 130 tons, negative 130 tons of emissions is what we can now say we have achieved to date and proven.
That's crazy.
That we're, like a carbon negative solution for gifting, as long as our customers, include the trees planted option consistently, and as long as recipients keep choosing that because they understand that actually because they want to pay it forward. They want this occasion of receiving a gift to do good, to help the planet.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool example. And I'm curious, were there any other kind of like surprises? I know that there were a couple gifting options that we had in there that were maybe a bit more carbon intensive than you guys thought. I'm curious if you could walk us through any of those examples as well.
Yeah, there's two that come to mind. So in one case, our like third largest gift campaign to date, or actually, no, I take that back. Our largest and second largest gift campaigns to date were carried out in 2021 and 2022. And in those gift campaigns, there was a sizable Air Canada voucher available to recipients to claim. And understandably, recipients jumped on that as their preferred gift option.
Right.
A good number selected other options like, a voucher for having a meal out, masterclass, digital subscription, trees planted. Like there were other options for recipients to choose from, but the result of so many people in those two campaigns that had, I think, around 2,000 recipients in each, is that they were less sustainable than if everyone received a T-shirt or a swag box. So, we looked at that and said, okay, well, next time there's a large dollar value gift campaign, maybe it's not a great idea to include the Air Canada or airfare gift option because of the emissions that the data showed were substantial. So that's one thing we learned, one story the data told us. However, overall, we're still negative emissions, inclusive of all those Air Canada vouchers that were claimed. Another point we don't talk about a lot because it doesn't always come up, but we do support companies who do corporate gifting and like just use Unwrapit as a white label solution to reveal a set of gift options to the recipients of their corporate gifting customers. It's a bit of a mouthful. And our largest relationship there involves sunglasses and the selection and shipping of sunglasses to recipients. I mention this because it's important for us to tell this story, this side of our business. But also it's important because we, with your help, included the emissions associated with the manufacturing and shipping and use of those sunglasses in coming to the number, negative 130 tons of CO2 emissions achieved to date. So it's a substantial accomplishment because there are physical gifts floating through our system. There are gift cards redeemable for airfares, and the platform and our customers are still achieving negative emissions overall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think I really like both of those stories, right? Especially having the benchmarks, I think is really key in the work that we've done together, right? Because it kind of shows how much you guys care about this and communicating this properly, because even in those benchmarks, I remember we were talking about, you wanted to see the t-shirts manufacturing shipping to the customers directly versus shipping to a central location and handing it out at the events. Like, we went into a pretty good amount of detail in those benchmarks. And I'm wondering, since we've done that kind of preliminary look at everything, have your conversations with your customers changed at all? I know, like, internally you guys have been doing kind of these thought exercises, but I'm curious if that has impacted even your corporate customers that you're doing these campaigns with, if that's come up at all.
Oh yeah, like we're so excited about it. The fact that we can prove and demonstrate the negative emissions that these campaigns are achieving, and to sell that too. Like when we're selling the solution, this is more sustainable, And we'll show you with a custom report just for your campaign what the emissions profile of the actual gifts claimed are. So we're absolutely now leading with that data storytelling. And I think in time, we'll also be attracting customers who want to be able to tell that negative emissions story that results from their choice to use Unwrapit for corporate event gifting. For right now, for some of our customers, that's like, we've told them what the number is, they're hugely excited about it, and it aligns to their values, their reasons for having chosen Unwrapit. And for other customers who didn't choose Unwrapit on that basis alone, it's like, oh, that's great that, when we sent 2,000 recipients a gift in 5 different regions of the world, we still were able to achieve negative emissions because we included trees planted as a gift option and recipients chose that. So it's interesting to see that there's no one's reacting to this finding and storytelling and saying, oh darn, I really wish the emissions we were higher on what we did. Like it's just not a thing in 2024. Everyone's going to see this. That's a good news story.
Yeah, for sure. And it's great as well when it's like, okay, you have, there's a business reason for doing this, efficiency and logistics as well of not managing all of the swag associated, and to have sustainability. And I think sometimes people often think of sustainability as a bonus, but to your point, you've always been leading with this, even though that might not be the number one reason people go with Unwrapit previously, right? Because the market also has to catch up to these values as well. But it's almost like you're kind of like future proofing yourself for those conversations. You have your kind of back pocket use cases to communicate with folks. And I'm wondering, like, now that you have the data to back it as well, if you think of the folks that you were talking to, like the 2 conversations you had before, actually working with us, I'm curious if you've like gone back to them and if you told them the updates. I'd be curious to hear what their reactions would be.
Yeah, we have told, like for example, Circular Economy Summit that I mentioned earlier, they used Unwrapit for speaker gifts. And that was a year ago, but in January, February, we shared the case study on our work with Circular Economy Summit for speaker gifts. And we were able to share, with confidence that they achieved negative 2,948 kilograms of CO2 emissions on speaker gifts alone, right? And so that's what the case study is centered on, given that as a body, they are promoting the circular economy, and the attendees and the speakers and everyone involved cares about it. And then in other cases, like the campaign I mentioned that achieved negative carbon emissions despite sending gifts to 3,845 recipients in 5 regions of the world, they were thrilled to hear this. The conversation with our contact with that company knew the choice to use Unwrapit was going to be more sustainable, and that was a factor in her pitch internally. But she didn't wasn't able to quantify that this would be a negative emissions campaign. And ultimately, we never know until after the campaign closes and we see how many folks choose trees planted as a gift, how many choose other very low or no carbon gift options. But the chances in our case that the gift campaigns are negative emissions are high because of our work to curate what is included in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. And if you think about so many corporates who are doing so much gifting, they all have sustainability targets. And, people often think about changing the lights or changing, the heating source and installing HVAC and all of that kind of thing. But solutions like yours, I think, are ones that hit so many areas of why people should do sustainability, right? Like the logistics, the costing, and also the emissions metrics. It seems like a no-brainer almost. So at least for us, it's really exciting to be able to help you validate that, because that's helping Unwrapit be an example for the industry to say, look, there are solutions. Like sustainability doesn't always cost you more. Like it's not always this big bad thing that's coming down the pipeline, right? So it's just really awesome to see you guys actually do that and like take it and commit to it and use it in reports. It's just really refreshing to see, because I know both of us have been working in sustainability for a while. So so it's great that people are quite receptive to that.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the statistics I mentioned at the beginning, in this case, there's no real or perceived sacrifice, right? Like people want to have experiences as gifts. They don't necessarily want branded promotional products sent their way. Some do, that's great. It's not an all or nothing situation for a company that does gifting year round and different occasions. But it's not like other areas where there is a real cost. There is potentially a real sacrifice, even if there are benefits and co-benefits of making the more sustainable choice. Here, it's just like low-hanging fruit. Like it requires some effort to try something new, in whatever realm. But our customers have seen that it works, and we have a high repeat business rate as a result.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so great. And I'm curious, you obviously have business goals. We all have business growth goals, but what does this mean for your sustainability journey as you're growing, right? Usually people see that conflicts, right? As they grow, they might emit more emissions, and that's a bit of a conflict. So I'm wondering kind of like what's next on your roadmap for the company? What are you guys working towards next?
I think the highest priority is going back and completing our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions with Carbonhound, just to make sure that, like it could be that our Scope 3 is like a very positive story, but if our team is flying all around the world to promote our solution, we could very quickly undo that overall negative emissions profile that we currently have. And so having a baseline there will help with our own B Corp recertification that we're currently, is underway. It will just give us and our customers and our team the full story of emissions. Now, we know we are pretty low emissions. It's a remote team. We don't do a ton of flying around the world. We pick and choose the conferences and events we attend very selectively. We're also constrained by the fact that we're a small business. And when we complete that work, I think we will see that airfare, our own airfare, is probably the biggest contributor to our emissions. And so therefore we will need to ensure we have multiple channels through which to generate business and interest in what we do, so that we don't have to lean too heavy on conference attendance that requires air travel.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a good shout too, because I think the way that you guys have gone about this, right, starting with your most material category, like there's a lot of gifting happening, and usually that, the category of emissions that we counted, so the procurement, the manufacturing, and the distribution is always the biggest source. So starting there, right, makes sense. Especially because it's matched up with what your customers want to know, right, for the campaign specific reporting. But yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to layer your operational footprint, almost doing it backwards, but in a way, I think it's fine, because Scope 3 is usually what people hide from, and you kind of dove right into it. And I think it'll be very cool to see how you can maintain that, right, as your volume goes up. How can you have that, negative, neutral, or negative, right, outcome holistically? So I personally, as a nerd, would like to see that. So
yeah, it's baked in, and we'll come to that again at the end. The kinds of work we've done upfront to curate the gift options available mean that these gift campaigns that we run aren't necessarily going to be no or low emissions, and in some case negative, as long as we don't pursue a growth at all costs approach, and then it's just become like any other corporate gifting platform that leans on Amazon cards and physical products and things that we know have a higher emissions profile. Ironically, our path to growth and scale will actually be through sticking to our knittings and sticking to this niche that we've carved out for ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. And now you have the data to make those decisions, right? Because I feel like there are so many people that I just know who work in sustainability, and the biggest frustration is that, they're executing all these reduction plans, but they haven't actually done the analysis of what their baseline is. So it's great that you started with that like gut feeling, and then you have the data to back it up. Like, I think it just goes to show that you can make some decisions with just a general understanding and logically that digital products would be lower carbon footprint than shipping things everywhere. But as you're refining and as you're growing, to your point, and as you want to maintain that level of credibility, as you grow and as you have the capacity to do so, then of course, the more data you have, the better that story can be and the stronger it can be. So we're running a little bit out of time. So I do want to move on to one of the funnest questions, in my opinion. But I'm curious to know what advice you would have for smaller or even mid-sized businesses out there that are looking at starting this journey, whether they were founded with sustainability values or not. I'm curious kind of what advice you would have for those people that are trying to be, credibly sustainable, right? And operate with the business values that you guys have.
My advice is to bake it in right at the beginning. Bake sustainability into your business. So over LinkedIn before as we were promoting this event, we talked about a cake metaphor, and I joked that it's better to bake it right in versus sprinkling it on top. But I think that the metaphor is apt. And like the planet is hurting, it needs to be able to heal itself. Consumers and talent are drawn to companies that have sustainability credentials, that are doing the right thing and making the right decisions to future-proof their business and protect the planet. So yeah, the advice is to start yesterday, just like if you could, but also to start small, because that's what we've done. That's what we did in just working on intuition versus having all the science confirm that our approach was valid. And then the other piece I would add, without getting too philosophical, is that pursuing and elevating sustainability as a strategy or as a priority is the right answer to multiple questions. This is a concept I always go back to as someone with very limited work time. If I can be doing something or advancing something that's the right answer to multiple questions, then I'm able to multiply the positive effects of my very limited time.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that leading with sustainability, I'm biased, but I agree, it's very productive. And so I'm curious, actually, on the note of like embedding sustainability into your strategy, like digging in a little bit more into that. Do you have any thoughts on how folks that maybe don't have that yet, even if they're a business owner or small business, maybe they have the power to change things, like where would they even start on that journey if they're like, going one direction and they've realized they want to pivot maybe a little bit more? Do you have any kind of first steps of developing that strategy, or things that like people can learn about or think about as they're trying to, maybe get more familiar in that space, being someone that's been doing it for a while?
This my response will be a little bit humorous, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's true. In my case, my partner was a major influence on me in choosing to put sustainability at the center of the work I'm doing as an entrepreneur. So surround yourself with people who care about the climate crisis, who are thinking about it. You can learn from them, be inspired by them. In my case, at the time I was starting Unwrapit, I was also hoping to impress Samantha with what I was choosing to turn my attention to. But honestly, if you are able to surround yourself with the people who are more knowledgeable on the topic, talk about the ideas, get up to date on the science, the right approaches, the right strategies will emerge. And conversely, like, don't wait for the sign or the mandate or the approval. There are ways to just start making your business more sustainable, that you can choose to act on.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great point, because as well, like, even when I was starting Impact Zero, and I know when Sanders and Kyrie were starting Carbonhound, this is such a new industry that people don't know everything all the time, right? And so leaning on your community, leaning on people that want to help and that have capacity to help, especially, to your point, is so productive because we're all figuring this out, right? Like, sustainability is so new, the industry is so new and evolving, and you already kind of alluded to the regulatory changes that are happening too. Community is always the answer, so I like that answer. That's a good one.
Yeah, date the right people or befriend the right people, or get to know professionally the right people, and you can then also be a leader in the field. I don't consider myself a leader in sustainability. I'm a B Corp entrepreneur, and the business of Unwrapit is related to sustainability. But I have read a lot now, and I've been inspired by climate leaders.
And you'll continue to prove out the business case too, so people can follow. You're like one of the trailblazers for sure. At least in my mind, I think you guys are.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Okay, awesome. So I just want to check to see if there are any questions from folks, because we have a little bit of time saved for that. Okay, so there's one here. I'm curious to hear your take on this. So if my boss or team doesn't see the value in sustainability, how do I get them to understand it?
I wish I had a good answer. I think, actually, I read an article recently in the New York Times about sort of the limited effects of doomism, and sort of the potential or the emergence of optimism and positivity as a path to convert and win over new members to this movement. And so, perhaps that is part of the answer. Lead with the positive stories and the examples of companies and teams reducing their emissions and the results of that positively for those teams. That could bring people along. And then also, recognize your own agency as a professional in the field. You don't have to work at a company that doesn't get it, or for a manager or director who doesn't get it, who doesn't share your concerns about the planet, or just what makes for good business at this day and age. So those would be my two pieces of advice.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely agreed. Okay, I think there's going to be maybe one more. Okay, yeah. How do you justify prioritizing and also allocating spend on climate as a small business with so many competing priorities? I think this one's particularly, for you guys being a small business, the reality is everyone is financially constrained and you have so many priorities at the same time. So do you have any thoughts on that, of just how you were able to prioritize it really in a world of having so many things going on?
I think in our case, and in I imagine the case of other businesses, maybe your own, the costs associated with taking the more sustainable route are often none or low. So yes, there are expensive ways to pursue it and to embed it and hire the consultants and produce the reports and build the business case. But there are also, $0 options to move sustainability forward in your business. For example, being comfortable with remote environments and team meetings is an obvious area where it's going to be a cost reduction and it's more sustainable. There's value to being in person, of course, but there's probably other times where a flight is not required or necessary. So I would the starting point, if budget is a major concern or constraint, is to find the zero or no cost options to move forward on this file.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, even just like kind of me reflecting on what you guys have done too, I feel like there are like sometimes just like more micro decisions along that thought process, right? Like you're just choosing the types of gifts to offer. Like that's not necessarily something that is challenging in the day to day, because there's always going to be something that's like a little bit better, right? A little bit less carbon intensive. And obviously you guys have like completely built your strategy and you've had to develop the product around that. There's a lot more that you've been able to do because you started thinking about this early. But I'm even thinking of like people that work in procurement generally. It's like, what vendors are you working with, right? Are you asking for this information? There could be kind of low hanging fruit just to give folks the information they need. In your day-to-day process that isn't actually like a whole ESG strategy or like a whole corporate sustainability report. To your point of like hiring consultants for like going full send on it. So.
Yeah, it might be the right approach in some cases. Like I'm sure the large consulting firms have value to add to the conversation.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the question is coming from someone who doesn't have those means or resources. And then, like, I guess thinking of it as not a cost center, but a cost saver, like Unwrapit also has no warehouse. We have no logistics. We have no fleet. Like some of our competitors would need to have all of those things in place before even being able to open their business. So the cost for us to even launch as a business focused on gifts that weren't physical was much lower than it would be had we wanted or needed to be shipping a specific kind of product that was physical.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, that's a good shout. Especially because, yeah, the whole business was created for the purpose of this. So it's easier to prioritize for you specifically. Okay, I think the last question, I promise, this one. So let me just see. Do you think that that gifting will continue to be more sustainable, or do you think that people always like their things? What are your thoughts on that?
It's a great question, and there are like very philosophical answers. There are very like practical answers. Our position is that it's not all or nothing, as I think I mentioned earlier. There are times to gift something physical. There's times for choice and optionality, where the recipient opts into the kind of gift they want to choose or have. And then there are other times where the appropriate gift is something entirely social impact. And actually, I would love to also close with an example of that. But yeah, looking forward 100 years from now, will there be physical gifts? Absolutely. It's an important part of human experience to be able to hold something, to know that it was given with desire to foster or strengthen a relationship, to value you or as a recipient. So yeah, I'm not a proponent of zero. I just had my birthday, got some physical gifts. It's okay, of course. But when we think about the industry as a whole, does it have to be 99% physical with so much landfill and so much emissions? Even if Unwrapit and the kind of philosophy we're promoting or the approach we're promoting results in a 30% reduction in physical gifts and carves out 30% of corporate gifting that can go towards social impact gifts or just non-physical gifts, the effect of that would be monumental, would be significant, would do a lot of good. So yeah, but don't think we are going to see the end of physical gifts anytime soon in our culture, in our lifetime.
Yeah, for sure. That's a fair point. I agree. But it is really cool to see you guys doing this and trying to change people, at least plant the seed, right? So amazing. Is there anything else that you want to share or mention just as we wrap up here? Anything you want to leave folks with before we?
Yeah, I would love to just share some statistics from a gift campaign we ran in the holiday season. The customer is not yet given permission to sort of be named in this case, so I won't use their name. But it was an organization that didn't want to just send something physical, so they were on board with the sustainability benefits or approach that Unwrapit offered. The campaign had close to 500 recipients all around the world. 80% of the recipients claimed a gift, so 400. 25% of those recipients chose to plant trees as their preferred gift option. All of the gift options were, for the most part, social impact or digital. But because the gift value was so high, just the people who chose to plant trees planted 13,950 trees over the holiday season.
Wow.
Another 147 people chose to make a donation to an organization promoting or protecting Indigenous communities and culture. And then the remaining recipients who claimed a gift claimed a digital subscription that we know has limited or minimal footprint. So total emissions on that campaign was negative 171,000 kilograms of CO2 emissions, thanks to the Carbonhound data. We know that. And the emissions of, if everyone had received a t-shirt from that same company, would have been 1,300 kilograms CO2 emissions. So it's just a great example to sort of close with, that the effect, the impact here is huge. This customer was still able to strengthen their relationships, and arguably strengthen their relationships even more so by leading with this impact and these values.
Yeah, and giving people what they want too, right? T-shirt might not resonate the same as supporting a cause that you really care about.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Peter, for joining us today. I know that, as people and obviously as companies as well, we have a lot aligned. So I'm really appreciative that you kind of set aside some time today to chat and share your story and be vulnerable with kind of your thought process, and shine a light on what it actually looks like and the questions that you come up with and the challenges that you face of being a business that is leading with this kind of purpose. So yeah, it's always good to see you, but especially thank you for sharing the time with us, and also inspiring folks if I get to see this.
Thank you for having me on the show, and for the work Carbonhound is doing with the Unwrapit team.
Amazing. Thanks so much. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining. If you registered, you will get a follow-up from our team with the link to the recording and whatnot. And you'll see us next time in about a month or so. We'll have another webinar with some more really fun guests, so stay tuned for that. And we'll hope you have a great week, and we'll see everyone soon.